Fusion Mobile, quality e-learning experience on the go.
The higher the price of a commodity, the lower the quantity that will be demanded of it. And the higher the lower the price, the higher the quantity that will be demanded for it. It's actually practical. That is on the assumption that income is fixed and some other things. But the normal situation is that whenever there's an increase in price, then the quantity demanded will decrease. But of course, on the other hand, when there's a decrease in price or fall in price, the quantity demanded, that means the consumers will be able to afford more. Now, from there, that means that there are certain things that actually affects or determines the demand. That takes us to point number 3 on our outline. We have the determinants of demand. You call it determinants of demand, or the factors that affect demand of a commodity. Now, the things that affect determinants of demand, first of all, is price of the commodity. The next, the income of the consumer. The next, taste, preference, and fashion. 4, advertisement. 5, price of other commodities. 6, population. Government expenditure, or government policy rather. We could have taxation. Well, the condition of the market and so on. Now, first of all, the price of the commodity, whatever, that is what the law was hinged on. The law says once the price changes, the quantity changes. So it means that once the price is facing a direction, the quantity will also respond to whatever the price says. But in this case, there's an inverse relationship or indirect relationship between price and quantity. So the law says when price drop, quantity demanded increases. When price increases, quantity demanded drops. So that is how the price of the commodity affects the product. And the income of the consumer says that the consumer's income actually determines what he is able to get. When the consumer's income increases, all other things being equal, he will increase his demand. But on the other hand, the same thing happens, he will decrease the demand, except when the commodity is not a normal good. We'll soon get to those things. A normal good is, of course, the kind of product or commodity that the consumers, that obeys the normal law of demand. Okay? But an inferior, you have other ones you call what? The inferiors and ostentatious goods. Inferior goods are actually goods that the consumer would actually reduce the consumption of such commodities once there's an increase in income. So in other words, income goes a long way in determining demand. Now the next one, we talk about what? Taste, preference, and fashion. Taste, preference, fashion. Fashion influences your preference. Preference influences, definitely determines what one's taste is. Taste and preference are most like, shows how you are going to arrange your priorities. Higher preference for a particular thing means that you would go all out. That means the higher the demand for such. When something is in vogue, there's a higher demand for such. But when it is what? It is out of fashion, then the demand falls. The next one, we have advertisement. The advertisement is a form of promotion, of course, with an identified sponsor. The advertisement in this case, once we talk about that, it actually stimulates demand. That means that effective advertisement increases the level of demand for a product by creating awareness. But on the other hand, the level of advertisement, a poorly advertised product will rarely get to the knowledge of those the consumers, and the consumers will not be able to demand for that. So a less effective advertising system leads to a lesser demand, while the reverse is the case when the advertisement is higher, is much more effective. Then price of other commodities. There are other commodities to a product. You could have substitutes, could have complements. Price of substitutes would actually change the demand for one, okay? And price of complements could actually also do the same thing. For instance, when I say substitute goods that are substitutes, we talk of things like, Coca-Cola and Pepsi. Are two things there's two commodities that can actually that can serve the same purpose. That is how you define substitutes. So close substitutes, when there's an increase in the price of a close substitute, the demand for the substitute falls. Let's say commodity A, Coke increases price of Coke increases. Then what will happen to the demand for Pepsi? The demand of Pepsi, your guess is as good as mine, will increase because people who leave Coke will start drinking or demanding for Pepsi. But talking about things like quite simple, cars and tires. Cocoa drinks or coffee and milk. These are things that are supposed to be used together in order to yield the same to actually complement or complete a function and yield one satisfaction. So such commodities are referred to as complementary goods or complements. So imagine an increase in the price of coffee, all other things being equal, an increase in the price of coffee would mean that milk will drop. The demand for milk will drop even though the price remains the same. Because people that take coffee and milk will reduce, and of course because this number of people, there are lesser coffee being demanded, that means that it will need to be combined with lesser quantity of milk. So in other words, for complements, an increase in price of X will lead to a decrease in demand for the complement. But for substitutes, an increase in price of, say, a commodity X will lead to an increase in the demand of its substitute. Now, we are going to look at another one, population. We also have weather, climate, and stuff. Population is talking about the number of people that actually demand for these things. The number of people that demand for these things or the commodities, when they increase, that means there will be higher demand. But when they reduce, there will be what? There will be lower demand. That's just that. Then government policy, depending on the direction of the policy. The government policy could favor the consumption of a particular commodity, or it might not favor. Of course, for instance, we have the recent policy on ban of frozen food, or ban of imported rice. Now, it means that consumption of imported rice in Nigeria is going to reduce. or the case where the land borders have been closed to importation of cars. That means there will be lesser cars being imported. Or the situation, the government policy on used cars. It renders certain things contraband or not fit for importation or consumption or demand. So in such cases, then you would have, when the government policy favors a product, then the demand will also be affected. That means the demand will be increased because it will be found. But on the other hand, it will not if it doesn't favor that. Then taxation talks about a part or the tax that is attached to a product. When tax on a product is high, then dealing in that product or demanding for that product will be costly, definitely affects the price of the product. And eventually, when prices increase, then quantity reduces. That is about that on determinants of demand. Then, before we move to the other one, okay, there's the individual and market demand. Individual demand is also referred to as unit demand, just the demand of one consumer of a given quantity of a commodity at a time, place, and price. But on the other hand, we have the market demand. Market demand is what we also refer to as aggregate demand. The aggregate demand talks about the total quantity of a commodity consumed by the various consumers of that commodity at a given specific price. And that price, when you look at that, the prices for one commodity will definitely be fixed at a point, but when we are calculating just for one person, then it becomes what? Unit or individual demand. But on the other hand, we have what? The aggregate or market demand. Now, the aggregate or market demand is also referred to as consolidated demand because it looks at calculating everything every consumer does. Now, we have the demand schedule and the demand curve. When one of the tools of analysis in economics is tables, graphs, and curves. One of the tools of analysis in economics is tables. You have also graphs and curves. When you are dealing with demand, for you to be able to keep track of how demand changes, you have to record the prices and the relative quantities on a demand schedule. So that's to say that a demand schedule is a tabular presentation of the relationship or the quantities demanded of a product at their relative prices. So at a particular price, you have a quantity demanded, and as the time goes, as the quantity goes on, as the prices change, you also have quantities. Now, but you also have, when the values on a demand schedule is presented on the Cartesian plane, that is the x and y axis on a graph, then it becomes a demand curve. A demand curve is a graph that shows the relationship between the price and quantity demanded. Now, for an illustration, Now, taking an illustration here, these are two demand schedules. Schedule 1 represents a unit demand curve or individual demand curve. As you can see, just relates the price and quantity demanded for just one person. But the second one, which is the market or aggregate demand curve, shows the demand, assumes that Tina, Uche, and Bola are the people that demand for this commodity in question. Now, at 20 naira, Uche demands for 100, or Tina demands for 100, Uche demands for 70, and Bola goes for 40. Now, each of these are the unit demands, but the total demand of all these consumers becomes the market demand or the consolidated demand for this product. Now, these two are demand schedules, but presented on the axis, the x and y axis, it gives us a demand curve. Now, I have, for this one, the x-axis represents quantity demanded, is the quantity axis, while y-axis is the price. 20, 30, 40, 50, and 60. 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. So the x-axis represents the price, the quantity, and the y-axis that. Now, over here I have 20 when the price is 20, quantity is 100. I have this. When price is 30, I have 80. When price is 40, I have 60. And when price is 50, I have 40. And price this one is 20. So a curve like this is your demand curve. So this is your demand curve. The same thing you are going to do when you are dealing with a market demand curve, but you are not concerned with the individual ones. What you are concerned with is the price axis and the total quantity demanded values. In other words, for a market demand, I'll have the quantity, this total here, as the quantity here. And the curve we'll have is called a consolidated demand curve. Okay, now that leaves us with the next one, the demand function. The demand function. The demand function is the mathematical relationship existing between the price and the quantity demanded of a product. The relationship between price and quantity as far as demand is concerned is inverse. That means when price is increasing, quantity reduces, just like the law says. And when prices reduce, the quantities increase. So let me cut. Now, going for the demand function. The demand function is the mathematical relationship existing between the price and quantity demanded. The relationship is such that it is what? Negative or inverse. When prices increase, like the law says, quantity demanded reduces. Now, that means that the demand function QD is definitely a function of still price. Okay? But now, mathematically, QD, this is a demand equation now. QD is equal to A minus BP, because P is negative, has an inverse function, or possibly we could, is an inverse function, so it must have a negative value. Now, going with that, your demand function can actually be formed from your demand schedule. And of course, your demand schedule, your demand function can also be used to form your demand schedule when prices are given. Now look at this. There's something they call coordinates. For instance, an illustration. From this thing, you are told to what? Estimate or determine the demand function for the above schedule, or from the above schedule. Now, what do we have? We have something you call coordinates or equation of a line. Of course, this is a linear thing. From what we saw in the curve, it's just a straight line. So you have your P minus P1 over Q minus Q1 is equal to is equal to P2 minus P1 over Q2 minus Q1. Now this is determined by whatever you choose to be your first point and second point. Most often our point one will pick price. We'll let our P1 be the first point. The first point is P1 is 20, and that means Q1 is 100. And P2, we take the last point. P2 definitely is going to be 60, and Q2 will be equal to 20. So in other words, I could substitute into this thing. I'll have P minus P1 here is 20 over Q minus Q1 is 100 equals P2 60 minus 20 divided by 20 minus 100. I will get something P minus 20 divided by Q minus 100 equals that is 40 by minus 80. Of course, this whole thing will give me 2.5. 1 over 2 by the time 40 cancels through. I have P minus 20 by Q minus 100 equals minus 1 over 2. And of course, concluding that on this side, I would have a cross multiplying here to this. 2 times P, I have 2P, and was that minus, okay, no, let's do this. 2 multiplying P minus 20 equals minus 1 multiplying Q minus 100. That leaves us with 2P minus 40 equals minus Q plus 100. And taking the other things to one side, I have Q, this minus Q will come here, 2 plus Q then plus 2P equals 100, then minus 40 becomes plus 40, and definitely this one goes over, they have what? Q equals 100 plus 40, 140 minus 2P. As you can see this, it looks like this, isn't it? Yes, it definitely looks like that. So which means any equation, any quantity equation, once if there's nothing here specified as D or S to tell you whether it's quantity demanded or supplied, you have to just look at this. Once you have a negative coefficient of the price, then this is a demand equation. So a demand equation, a demand function, a demand schedule, and the other one, the graph becomes a demand curve. So you're welcome back. We are still on the study session on the theory of demand. Before the break, we were talking about demand function. We started by defining demand, stating the law of demand, analyzing the determinants of demand, demand schedule and demand curve, individual market demand, then the demand function. Now, before we move on to types of demand, there's something very important we should know, and that is referred to things called change in demand. And change in quantity demanded. Now, looking at this, one would actually say, of course, it's the same thing, but the truth is they aren't. Change in demand actually talks about the demand curve changing, moving from one point to another, owing to a change in other factors affecting demand, except a change in the price. Meaning that things like income of the consumer will change, population will change, advertisement will change, price of other commodities. Now, when those things affect or determine the size of demand, then it is referred to as a change in demand. Of course, change in demand could be to the left or to the right. A movement of the curve to the left means an increase or a decrease in demand, while a movement to the right talks about an increase in demand. That means if I have this is the quantity axis, and this is price. This is demand curve 1, D1, and it moves to this point, D2, and that means movement from here to here. In fact, once it is numbered this form, you don't actually need anyone to tell you. You don't need the arrow. So, meaning that this was the initial one, it moved to the new one, which is this D2, and that means there's an increase in demand, and this is what you refer to as a change in demand. Other factors affecting demand, other determinants affecting demand lead to change in demand except the price of the commodity. Now, the second side of it, which is change in quantity demanded, is a movement along the demand curve resulting from a change in the price of the commodity while all other factors remain constant. If income changes, it leads to change in demand. If the price of the commodity changes, it leads to a change in quantity demanded. Now, what would a change in the price of other commodities result in? Is it going to be a change in demand or change in quantity demanded? You could answer that from my explanation. Now, let's move on. For a change in quantity demanded, say I have D here. This is the price, this is the quantity demanded. Now, movement from A to point B is owing to a change, a fall in price from 20 to 8. Meaning that quantity demanded probably increased from 5 to 12. So just this movement along this demand curve is referred to as the change in quantity demanded. Moving down there, we have types of demand. Types of demand in economics, we have 4 types of demand. First, I have joint demand. There's competitive demand. There's composite demand. and there's derived. Joint, competitive, composite, and derived demand. Now, joint demand is also referred to as complementary demand. It is the demand for complementary goods. In such a demand situation, an increase in the price of one commodity leads to a decrease in the quantity demanded of another commodity. Say the demand for the demand for cars and tires. An increase in the price of cars means that lesser people will be using cars, other things being equal, and before that is the immediate effect definitely is that people will lesser people will be using their cars. That means lesser people will be needing tires. So in other words, increase for a joint demand, that is demand for complementary goods, that's why it is called complementary demand. So the second one, competitive demand. Competitive demand is demand for close substitutes. It's a form of demand where the increase in the price of a commodity leads to an increase in the demand for the other commodity. That means if A increases, say Milo increases its price, that means that more people will divert to consuming things like Bonvita. Then that is a contrast from the first one. The first one, increase in price reduces the demand for the other. But second one, increase in the price of one increases the demand for the other. And the third one is composite demand. That is a form of demand where the demand for one commodity solves a lot of other demands. It brings about satisfaction of a lot of other demands. For instance, the demand for crude oil brings about the demand for PMS, brings about the demand for diesel, brings about the demand for kerosene, brings about the demand for engine oil or lubricants, engine lubricants, and so on, bitumen as well. That's the one that is locally called coal tar, PMS, premium motoring spirit, and so on and so forth. Now, as we can see, demand for crude oil brings about the demand for each of these. Now, what other products can you think about that will bring about some other things? Your guess might be as good as mine, but well, I'll leave you to that. The last one, which is derived demand. Derived demand talks about a type of demand where a commodity or product is not demanded for what it can do, but for what it will yield in the future. That means not for its own sakes, but because of the thing it will perform at a particular time. And the things that actually belong to derived demand are the factors of production: land, labor, capital. By the time you employ an individual, you're not employing the person because he's handsome, not because he's good looking, not because he dresses well, but because he's going to actually yield something for you, make something out of his job, out of his skill, make it of his skill to actually do something for the firm. Then that is why you hire labor. When you invest capital, you are not investing capital just because you want to spend money, but because of the profit or dividend is going to yield at a particular time. So that is about types of demand. Now, the abnormal demand situation talks about the exceptions to the law of demand. The abnormal demand. the abnormal demand. The abnormal demand is a demand situation that disobeys or that does not obey the law of demand. It refers to an exceptional case where instead of a product, the quantity demanded for a product to increase or to reduce when prices increase, then it either remains constant or it increases along with the price. Those are exceptional cases of demand. Remember that the law of demand says the higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded. But the exceptional rule of demand says the higher the price, the higher the quantity, or the higher the price, there is a constant quantity demanded. So, in other words, the abnormal demand situation produces a positively sloped demand curve like this. This is an abnormal demand curve. Here is quantity and here is price. Or it produces a kinked demand curve like this. This could also be a demand curve. Quantity and price. These two are abnormal demand situations where prices, instead of quantity falling as prices are increasing, quantity is increasing along with the price. There are reasons for these things, that is, factors that result in an exceptional demand situation. Now, first out of them is what we call anticipatory consumption. Factors that lead to an exceptional demand: anticipatory consumption. 2, the case of inferior goods. Goods. 3, Veblen effect. Veblen effect. We have the snub effect, the bandwagon effect, and the conspicuous consumption. Now, talking about the first one, anticipatory consumption means consuming, patterning, trying to actually obey future expectations. It is assumed that when prices increase now, it's a marker that there is going to be a further increase in price. So instead of people waiting, they want to avoid to spend more in future, they in turn buy more now that prices are increasing for the fear of spending more in future. And of course, for certain items, you want to spend less because you have seen that prices are falling. Now, that is about what? Anticipatory consumption. Designing your demand according to the expectation of either a fall or rise in price. Second one is case of inferior goods. Earlier on in this session, we defined what inferior goods are. You could actually go back to that part. Now, inferior goods actually are consumed lesser when the consumer experiences an increase in his income. It's consumed less when the individual experiences an increase in income. Now, what now happens? That means that even though the prices keep on reducing, provided the consumer's income is improving, then he takes less of such a product. Then it becomes the abnormal situation. Then the next one is the Veblen effect. The name Veblen actually is also called, Veblen goods are actually called goods of ostentation, luxurious goods. Goods that are not consumed because you actually need them. They are not bought because it is needed, but they are bought or consumed because they mark status. They actually show the pedigree, or it increases one's self-esteem, okay, or status in the society. They are status markers. So those are things you call articles of ostentation. Now, in the paradox of value, the lesser things in life, the less important things in life cost the most, while the most important things cost the less. So the first case of the paradox talks about cases of ostentation. That is, cases of ostentation is also referred to as the Veblen effect. Now, the snob effect is a situation where demand falls, demand reduces, even though there's a reason, there's a reduction in price, but demand tends to continue dropping, all because there's a general withdrawal in the consumption or demand for that product. A good example, imagine when there was a rumor that there's a kind of beans that kills. Then a whole lot of people, I guess, withdrew from consuming beans. So in other words, there was the snob effect on beans. So demand of beans will definitely drop, even though that means people that have them in stock will want to sell at lower prices. But because of the thing attached to it, then it won't sell. The next one, the bandwagon effect, is the opposite of the other one. That is the general increase noticed in the demand for a commodity because a whole lot of people or other people are consuming it. Now, imagine where a lady sees or someone notices something that is good being worn by someone else, and next thing you walk up to the person, who made this for you, and the cycle keeps on growing. Then before you know it, such style or such clothing will be actually very popular, and that is talking about the bandwagon effect. Now, the next one, which is the conspicuous consumption. Conspicuous consumption talks about a method of consumption or demand where an individual actually consumes just because he wants to prove a point, or because he wants to show that things are better than, where people will actually get to a bar, declare for everyone, not just because the money is so much, but just because they want to do that. So that is talking a case of what? Conspicuous consumption. It leads to abnormal demand. Now, the next part of the next things to be considered here on the outline is the elasticity of demand. Elasticity of demand. Demand elasticity talks about the degree of expansion or contraction of demand whenever there is a change in the major determinants of demand. Increase or the proportionate change in the quantity demanded of a product whenever there is a change in the price of the product, the income of the consumer, or the price of other commodities. So in other words, with this definition, then it now tells us that there are three basic types of demand, three main types of demand. You have the price demand elasticity, I beg your pardon. It has price elasticity of demand. We have the income elasticity and the cross elasticity of demand. Price elasticity of demand is the degree of responsiveness or change in or proportionate change in demand of a commodity whenever there's a change in the price of the commodity. Income elasticity of demand is a change in the price, is a proportionate change in price in the demand of a commodity or a degree of responsiveness of the demand of a commodity in response to a given proportionate change in the income of the consumer. While the cross elasticity of demand measures the degree of change or level of responsiveness of demand whenever there is a change of a commodity, whenever there is a change in the price of another commodity. Each of these elasticities have their functions or have the way they relate to one to the other, or their relative importance. Now, we'll pick the first one, which is price elasticity. Price elasticity of demand, like we said, measures the degree of responsiveness or change in the quantity demand of a product when there's a change in the price. So in other words, that means price elasticity of demand is measured by E, which is equal to percentage change in quantity demanded by the percentage change in price. Now, definitely percentage change in quantity is equal to the change in quantity over original quantity multiplied by 100 over 1, while of course that is the same thing as saying Q2 minus Q1 by Q1 multiplied by 100 over 1. Okay. Similarly, percentage change in price, percentage change in price is change in price by price multiplied by 100 over 1, which is definitely P2 minus P1 over P1 multiplied by 100 over 1. Now, which means when you are making use of this formula that to calculate for price, to measure price elasticity, then you have to actually, first of all, estimate the change in percentage change in price, estimate the percentage change in quantity, then to calculate the elasticity you divide one by the other. Then, but more directly, this approach is actually much more beneficial to people that are writing theoretical exams like the WAEC or NECO students. Then, but the second formula, which is saying that elasticity, price elasticity is equal to change in quantity by change in price multiplied by price over quantity. So I will have to do this Q2 minus Q1 by P2 minus P1 multiplied by P1 over Q1. Okay? Now, in that case, once we are able to do this, we'll have a good measure of price elasticity of demand. Now, the other thing, when you have calculated these things, there are ways, there are importance, there are degrees rather of price elasticity. You can use price elasticity to actually determine the level or the revenue that is expected from a product, or you can actually use it to actually determine pricing decisions in a firm. For instance, or you can use it to determine level of competitiveness of a product in the market. Now, over here, the degrees of price elasticity we have, or in most cases they are called types or degrees of price elasticity. We have the first one, unitary or unit elasticity. In this case, the unit elasticity, the percentage change in price is the same, brings about the same percentage change in quantity, and that means that this implies that the price elasticity is equal to 1, and percentage change in price equals percentage change in quantity. Now, the second one, we call it zero elasticity, or perfectly inelastic. Demand. In this case, a change in price brings about no change in the quantity demanded. That means that where you have a change in price, percentage change in price brings about an insignificant change or zero change in quantity demanded, and as such, elasticity coefficient is equal to 0. So when it is 1, you have unit elasticity. When it's 0, you have perfectly inelastic or zero elasticity. And the other one, we have elastic or fairly elastic demand. The fairly elastic demand says that it's a demand situation, or yes, where a proportionate change in price results in a greater proportionate change in quantity demanded, which means that the proportionate change in price is lesser than the proportionate change in quantity demanded. That implies definitely that what percentage change in price is less than the percentage change in quantity, and that means that elasticity of demand is greater than 1, or 1 is less than the elasticity coefficient, which is less than what? Infinity. That means it can go on, but it is greater than 1. 1 is the least value, the lower limit of it. And the fourth one, which is inelastic demand. Inelastic demand. Here, of course, that's the opposite of this. That means that what? Percentage change in price is greater than percentage change in the quantity. Now, in this case, demand is between 0 and 1. So when you calculate and you have something of between like 0.7, 0.3, 0.2, then you talk about an elastic demand. Then when you say that there's what? When you have 2 point something, 1 point something, or even, 1 point something, 5 point whatever, 100 point whatever, then, or 100, just any other value that is greater than 1, then we say that what demand is elastic. But where it is 0, we say is what? Perfectly inelastic. And the last one, they have the perfectly elastic demand, which is what is referred to as infinite elasticity. That is a case or a situation whereby an insignificant change or very little change, an insignificant change in price that is close to 0 change in price will lead to a continuous or inestimable or very great change in the quantity demanded. So this implies definitely that percentage change in price is 0 and percentage change in quantity, which is less than percentage change in quantity. Then this is the 5th degree of price elasticity. First one is unit elasticity, second one zero elasticity, third one elastic demand, fourth one inelastic demand, and perfectly elastic demand. Now the elasticity coefficient here we say is what? Infinity, because definitely you will be dividing a number by 0. Any number divided by 0 is regarded to be undefined. Now, what are the factors that determine price elasticity? What are these factors that actually determine price elasticity? First, among the list, you have the nature of the product. We have the degree of necessity. Availability of substitutes. Availability of storage facilities. The time of adjustment. To change in price. Proportion of income. Spent on consumption. Now, to just shed a little light on these things, nature of the product talks about how the product is used. What are the things that it involves? Some products can be used for different things, while some things are just used for single things. For instance, a product that has multiple usage is much more of higher demand than the other. Like when you have a person that is versatile, has much more value in the labor market than someone that is just specific in nature, just professional in one thing and the other. Then the next one, the degree of necessity, talks about how important something could be. How important it is determines the elasticity. People tend to actually get more, how do I put this? They get more agitated when things that are very necessary to them are affected. Then they will be able to give more for that. Then the more necessary a product is, then the higher or the lesser the elasticity. That means the more inelastic it becomes. And the lesser the necessary it becomes, then the higher the elasticity. That means it becomes more elastic. The next one, you have availability of substitutes. Goods that have lesser substitutes are much more inelastic. Take, for instance, when our telecommunications was actually just probably one or two companies, then that is a case of inelasticity. Then that means prices could increase and people would actually respond less to it. That means people will not have an option to leave. But on a case where you have a product like Milo, of course, anything that makes the price to increase, there's always something else for people to fall back on. That means there will be higher change in the quantity than the change in price. So in other words, the more substitutes you have, the more or the higher the elasticity, and vice versa. Then availability of storage facilities. Storage facilities makes it possible for quick supplies to be made so that people can actually adjust to demand. Where supplies are not available, then demand becomes much more competitive, then much more inelastic. Then the next one, time of adjustment to change in price. If it takes you longer to adjust to a change in price, then the product becomes inelastic. If it takes lesser time, then it becomes elastic. Shorter time, inelastic. Longer time, elastic. Then the next one, you have proportion of income spent on consumption. In many cases, consumers have a fixed proportion, fixed percentage of their income that must be spent on a particular thing. And when income is constant and price changes, then there could be a problem adjusting from, that is, changing the proportion you spend on such things, because changing the proportion might not necessarily mean that you have an amount that will cover the expenses. So in other words, if the proportion is fixed, then demand becomes inelastic. When it can be easily adjusted to suit the consumption, then it becomes more elastic. That is that on the price elasticity. So over here we have an illustration on price elasticity. The question here says we should calculate the price elasticity of demand and comment on the result. What we are talking about is you determine what degree it is, whether elastic, inelastic, or whatever. So to start with, the first price I have there is 10 naira. 10 naira at 10 naira, 40 units, 40 kilograms were demanded, and at 8 naira, 48 kilograms were demanded. So as price decreased, quantity increased. But now, to calculate the elasticity, elasticity of demand, we said is calculated as percentage change in price by percentage change in quantity. So by percentage change in quantity, we have the quantity, the second quantity is 48 minus 40 divided by the initial quantity is 40 multiplied by 100 over 1. So now this is 8 over 40 times 100 over 1. 0 will go with 0. 4 in dividing 8, I have 2. So 2 times 10, I have 20%. Percentage change in quantity, in price rather, is 10 minus 8 over the initial one is 10 multiplied by 100 by 1. So what do we have? 2 over 10 multiplied by 100 over 1. This goes with this, so 2 times 10, I still have 20%. So in other words, my price elasticity is equal to 20, which is the percentage change in price, divided by 20, and that is 1. Now, with that calculation, I think we are done with the first question. And the second says, comment on your results. It is to tell us the type of results we have. From what we discussed on degrees of price elasticity, it means this is what? A unitary or unit elastic demand. Unitary elastic demand. So demand is unit elastic or unitary elastic. Now that is that. Or we could actually use the second formula. The second formula for elasticity says, for price elasticity, says that elasticity is equal to change in quantity by change in price multiplied by price over quantity. Now, change in quantity 48 minus 40, change in price 10 minus 8. The initial price is 10, the initial quantity is 40. Let's see if we'll have the same thing. 48 minus 40 is 8, 10 minus 8 is 2, multiplied by 10 over 40. So this goes here, and 2 divides 8 are 4. 4 divides 4, that's 1 over 1. So I guess we have equal values. So which means demand is still unitary elastic. In any case, you could actually, depending on the kind of exam you're taking, you're sitting for, the exam could be, once it's theory-based, you use the first solution. But if it is just a multiple choice exam, like the UTME organized by JAMB, or some other exams, then you are free to use this. Then, now we move to the next one, income elasticity of demand. Income elasticity of demand. The income elasticity of demand is a measure of the degree of responsiveness or percentage change in the quantity demanded of a product whenever there is a change in the income of the consumer. Just like price elasticity, income elasticity can be calculated using the coefficient EY, which is equal to percentage change in quantity demanded divided by percentage change in income. Of course, using the same formula, we would have, or on the alternative, you would have this is equal to change in quantity by change in income multiplied by initial income over initial quantity. Which definitely, of course, this will be Q2 minus Q1 by Y2 minus Y1 multiplied by Y1 over Q1. Where what? Y equals income, Q equals quantity demanded. The income elasticity of demand is actually used to categorize goods or classify goods. And the kind of product depends on the level, on the coefficient of income elasticity. Let's say we have goods are classified into, using income elasticity, goods are classified into necessities, luxuries, comforts, inferiors. Necessary, comforts, inferiors. Now, for necessities, the income elasticity is greater than 1. For luxuries, the income elasticity is equal to 0. For this, for comforts, income elasticity is between 0 and 1. 1 is less than income elasticity with less than 1. And for inferiors, income elasticity is less than 0. That means that is what? Negative. Income elasticity is negative. So you could actually use the values of income elasticity to classify the the products or the commodities into those 4 variants. Cross elasticity of demand is a measure of the degree of change in the quantity demanded of one commodity to a change in the price of another commodity. That is how the demand response of one commodity responds to a change in the price of another commodity. Now, the cross elasticity of demand is also used to classify products on basis of relationship. That is to find the relationship between 2 products or 2 commodities. Now, in such cases, using cross elasticity coefficient, we could find out whether 2 products are substitutes or whether they are complements or whether they are unrelated or neutral. Now, to go there, my cross elasticity of demand between product X and Y is equal to percentage change in quantity of X by the percentage change in price of Y. Then that means definitely, alternatively, elasticity between X and Y is equal to change in quantity of X by change in PY multiplied by initial PY by initial QX. So, and where elasticity coefficient is greater than 0, that means it's positive. It implies goods X and Y are substitutes. Substitutes. Where the elasticity coefficient between X and Y, the cross elasticity coefficient is less than 0, that is where it is negative, then goods X and Y are complements. But where the cross elasticity is equal to 0, then X and Y are unrelated. I think now we have come to the end of this study session on demand and theory of demand. Rolling on your screen next will be another set of questions. You will go through them, try to make some good responses to them, and where you have issues, you can go back to the video. Thank you.